To add some text, you use the Type tool by pressing the T hotkey. Now you can write, and when you finish, you'll see a new layer in the Layers panel. This is vector-based, so that means you can enlarge it to any degree and it will keep its smoothness. There are two ways of adding text. I just showed you the first one. You click and you start typing. The second one is that you click and you drag. This way you create a region where your text will be constrained. But no worries, you can always resize this box by using these handles. To finish editing your text layer, press the numerical Enter. To go to another line, use the regular Enter. If you want to undo what you've added, press the Escape key. Same thing applies no matter how you choose to enter your text, by clicking or by clicking and dragging. Most likely, this is not how you want your text to look though. To make it easier to adjust your text preferences, you can use the Character panel. I always have it docked here, and I always move it underneath the Paragraph panel. The alternative would be to use these settings from up top, but I don't consider them the best option, so let's stick with this panel. If you don't have it, just go to Windows, Character, and it will show up. From here, you can change just about anything you want from it. The first one is Font Family. Pretty straightforward, it tells you what font you're using. Your operating system already comes with fonts pre-installed, and so does Photoshop. But just in case you want to download more, you have a big library of free fonts at google.com/fonts. To install them, you have to add them to your collection. Next, you click on the download icon, and from the new pop-up window, you'll choose the first option, the zip file. Next, extract the archive and paste those fonts into your operating system's fonts folder. For me, that's C, Windows, Fonts. Restarting Photoshop is optional, but in some cases it's needed. For those who have a CC version, so a Creative Cloud version, there's another option to get fonts called Typekit. First, you open up your Creative Cloud application and you head over to the Assets tab. Here you'll find Fonts as the second sub-tab. From here you press Add Fonts from Typekit and you'll be sent to the official Typekit site. Sort the fonts by using these filters on the right side to get the one that fits your style. Then hover on a font and press on Use Fonts. A new window will appear asking you to sync selected fonts. Press that after you've launched your Creative Cloud application. It should download to your computer and be ready to use in Photoshop. So that's how you add fonts. Let's focus back on the Type tool and on this Character panel. On the right of our font family, we have our font weight. Photoshop calls it font style. Here you can expect to find quite a few. In general, you'll have narrow, light, regular, bold, black, etc. That's why I call it font weight, but also because that's the official CSS term. Just in case we don't have any options, we can use faux bold and faux italic. Faux is French for fake. This makes the font look like it has a bold and an italic style, but keep in mind this can't be implemented in modern web design. If it's for an image on Facebook, that's great, but for a website design, it's not recommended. Moving on to the font size, I like to type in my value manually, and I've gotten used to using pixels instead of points. That's what I recommend you use as well. Points are used in the printing industry, and those who recommend you use them usually come from that background. When I want to browse around fast between sizes, I click once, and then I use my mouse scroll wheel to go through several sizes. You can also rapidly increase or decrease the size by clicking and holding on this area. Or you can use the drop-down, of course. Lots of ways to do the same thing. For me, this next preference is important. Whenever you want to make changes to your text layer, I recommend you do so by using the Character panel. That means that if you want to change the size, the color, absolutely anything, simply select your text layer from the Layers panel and then work on it from the Character panel. So exactly like we've been doing it so far. You may ask, what's the alternative? Well, I've seen lots of designers do the following. They select the Type tool, then they select the entire text layer, whether it's one word or an entire paragraph, and then they change its appearance from above. That's not efficient in my book, but moreover, it's quite confusing. Why waste time by performing a useless step? Not to mention, if you have the text selected and you're changing its weight, for example, you won't get to see the change accurately. You have to first deselect and then continue. Another thing regarding using the Character panel is that when you're done making changes, you simply press Enter. You don't have to select another tool or do anything like that. The confusion comes from doing this. You select the entire layer, you make some changes from up above because you don't know about the Character panel, and then, well, you're stuck. Some people go up top to click on this check mark, which I've probably used no more than 5 times in my life, or how most people do it, they go all the way over to the Tools panel and they select the Move tool. Obviously, they can't press V because that will make that letter show up in the text layer. I don't think this is optimal. We should respect everyone's opinion, decisions and workflow, yet I find this a strange choice, especially when you're working with text layers a lot. So in conclusion, don't select your text on the canvas and then change its settings. Instead, have it selected in the Layers panel and use this feature here. Okay, next to the font size, we have leading, which is also called line height in CSS. I prefer that term because it's self-explanatory. This controls the amount of vertical space between the lines of text, thus the name. It's great for improving readability, and I think it's a must when it comes down to paragraphs. Be generous with it. The auto option makes the text look cramped, and nobody wants to read something that looks like this. Going underneath the font size, we have kerning, but that's not really interesting, so we'll skip it. To the right of it, we have a feature called tracking, but I like to call it by its CSS name, letter spacing. And its name describes what it does very well. It controls the overall space for groups of letters or entire paragraphs. This is something that completely changes the way your text looks. It's quite easy to use, and you can clearly see the advantages of it when we increase tracking to 10. This increases the space between our letters and thus gives it a more airy feel. This improves both readability and aesthetics in most cases. You can also go the other way around and squeeze the text in. -20 is a good example. The results aren't dramatic, but that's exactly what we want: subtlety. This is great for a few words in a title or something similar, but for paragraphs you should avoid it. You can also go to town and input some large values. It's up to you, depending on the type of effect you want to get. One thing I'd like to add before moving on is that you can switch to the other text layer format by right-clicking in the Layers panel. So if you drag a box and put in some text, but then you want the box to go away, simply right-click and select Convert to Point Text. Why would you want to do that? Well, because your box can be pretty big and that messes up your alignment. For example, I have this paragraph of text, and as you can see, the border around it goes far more down than the text itself. If I have a rectangle and I want both of them to sit on the same base, I'll use these options at the top. But look what happens. Photoshop sees the base where the box ends, not where the text finishes. That's not ideal. So that's how you remove that box. It works the other way around too. Just right-click and select Convert to Paragraph Text, and there you go. You now have these handles, and you can expand your region of typing. The other options in this panel aren't very important. It's for those users who are really into typography, so I wouldn't get intimidated by all these options. Besides the colour, we're not going to talk about too much else. Speaking of that, it's super easy to use. Initially, the text uses the foreground colour, but with a click, you get to see the change immediately. That's it, no fuss about it. I do want to mention these 3 options here, but you already know them from Word or from WordPress or just about any text editor. This controls the alignment of your text. In general, you should keep it left aligned, but in some cases you might want to switch it up. As you can see, the paragraph changes its alignment, and it's pretty easy to understand how this works. A real-world scenario is this. I want a nice big title in the middle of my canvas, but I don't know what font to use or what size. Initially, I'll type it in and I'll use the alignment tools up top to center it horizontally. But now, if I change its formatting, I'll have to redo that step. Basically, each time I change my font, I'd have to recenter it on the canvas. You may think, hey, why not center it at the end when you know exactly what font you want to use? Well, that's because you always need to make a decision in the context of your work, so it's essential I have it in the middle of my screen. Sure, here I have nothing else in the background, but imagine I had 10 other layers around it. So what do? Well, you remove the left alignment and instead you center the text. Now you center it on the canvas with the tools up top. Now, whatever you do, the font will remain in that position. It doesn't matter how big you make it or how diverse the font family is. That's something really useful that you can apply to all your projects that deal with text. Okay, the last thing I want to point out is this hyphenate option. That's available in the paragraph panel, and that's right next to the character panel. Always uncheck it because your text will look way better without it. This is one of the things I've seen people struggle with. They just didn't know about this setting. Besides that, you're good to go.